Okay, please go to page 41. We're going to talk about how you prepare for a certification authority meeting. So as the LCA, what I do, and I'll go through and tell you what I do, and this is what you guys will do. I think ahead. Krista, I think, did a really nice job of mentioning how we decide what is an issue file, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But what we do, we kind of work together and we get the files ready for the certification authority meeting. If there's an issue on a file, particularly, let's say, on a self-disclosure question, that somebody marks it yes, that they have a license probation problem or something like that, what I do is I need to obtain more background information about that. What were the circumstances? When did it happen? Are they still on probation? Those kind of questions. On page 42 is kind of an outline that I developed that's just a template for phone calls when I call people. So you might develop this over time and find something works better for you. But I usually like to have the date of when I called them because it's kind of a good record. Sometimes I leave a message and I'm waiting for somebody to call me back. I put their name and what the topic is, what I need to talk to them about. I have on here that they marked yes to license suspension because that's a common one. Occasionally, then something will turn up on a background screen that is something else. And so then I'll write down what the charge was, like misdemeanor, whatever it was, or felony, whatever it was. And then sometimes I'm asking them more information and I fill in some of this. I would say it's rarely that I've needed to get into this much detail as far as the court and the case number and all that, but occasionally. And most of the time, I'm just making notes and I'm asking them, and I start out with letting them know who I am, that my role is to obtain information for the certification authority, that we have their application for certification, and just I have a few questions to ask, and just I'm obtaining clarifying information about what happened so we can better understand. So then I have that conversation, and I always document the notes, and I let them know at the end that the certification authority will meet and review the file and they'll make a decision. And I tell them that after the decision's made that they'll get a letter. And so that's always true. If we've decided to certify them, then they get a certification letter that says they're certified. Otherwise, they may get a letter that says that they're denied, and it'll say not a lot of reasons, it depends, but I'll show you those letters in a minute. We'll get to those a couple pages past that. But so that's basically the phone call to get more information. Sometimes it'll be a phone call, we'll have a certification meeting, and the certification authority is kind of wrestling with an issue and they still feel like they need more information. And sometimes they'll ask me to call the pastor and speak with the pastor at the local church to get more information about that person. And I think that's going to be a tremendous advantage you all are going to have, that in a lot of cases you're going to be really familiar with this person. For us, a lot of times all we're seeing is what's on paper and we're trying to make the decision, and it's very challenging. So I think we're going to go just a huge leap ahead with you all being able to look at the files and help make some of the certification decisions. On page 43 is an example of an Excel worksheet that I developed just to track the list when I prepare for the meeting. And this is kind of a lengthy list, mostly because I wanted to put several different examples on here. Usually we might have maybe anywhere from 3 to 6, maybe half a dozen names of files that we're reviewing. So like at the end of the summer, when we have a lot of files coming in because of summer camping season and mission trips and things like that, there's lots of volume. We do probably 1,000 files in the summer. So we might have 6, 7, 8 issue files out of that we have to decide. In the issue description, there's like examples of things that how something would get to be an issue file. And I kind of was able to come up with trends over time of categories. So license suspension is a really common one. A criminal record that might show. This one is becoming more frequent to have issues with marijuana or drug paraphernalia. DWI is a common one that we have to evaluate. What are we going to do as far as certification for them? Rarely, but occasionally, it does turn up that somebody's a registered sex offender. That'll come up on a screen. We had a situation where a pastor had recruited a volunteer to be involved for a retreat that was coming up, and they had us do the background screen, and it turned up that the person was a registered sex offender, and the pastor had no idea until that background screen was done. So it's not real high frequency, but it really validated for me the reason to do the background screens. Under number 9, I make a note, issue file for general reference. Can you turn up the volume a little bit, maybe, Holly, please? Sorry. So number 9 is the issue file because of a general reference. So that's really a note for me that helps because it might be a couple weeks, like I make the phone call and make notes, and it might be a couple weeks before we can actually get a meeting scheduled. So it helps me when I come to the meeting prepared that I can look at this and say, okay, on this file, the main issue is going to be with the general reference. So I'm sharing the information I have with the authority, and I know the main focus of our review needs to be on what the general reference commented on this person. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The categories here are what I use, and I think that this will evolve. You all will see what works best for you. I use categories. The self-disclosure questions are on the application, so that's that heading, the reference, and then a background screen. So I just mark an X over there of what the issue was. And for us at the conference level, we like, and I've just learned this, that the certification authority would always ask me, what church is this person at? And then they like to know who is the pastor. And it just puts a context for them. And as I was preparing this, I thought, well, for you all, you're going to be at your church, so you won't be asking those questions. So you may, I was thinking, well, maybe you would want to say who the general reference is from. You know, that might be important at the local church or something. And again, that's confidential, but the authority, you know, can know that information, but just within your group. On page 45, these are some guidelines. You can see in the bottom, we developed these back in 2006. And really the certification authority developed these. And probably Bev and Lee could talk about a little bit more about where those came from. But they had been on the authority for a number of years, and they put down in writing to kind of help clarify their thinking, here's how, or really to help explain, here's how we usually make our decisions. And I'm not going to read through all the detail, but I would just tell you a couple of the main kind of points for conference certification. And I think it would be good for your authority to get together and maybe review this and write your parameters that you want to use for your local church certification. Some givens under number A, if you look at A, letter A, automatically, if somebody's on the sex offender registry, that would be an immediate reason that they would not qualify for certification. That's kind of obvious, but it's just helpful to put it down in writing. A felony conviction, if a person's still on probation, especially for, sorry, my words are tripping up here, for felony, that would be a reason. Anytime there's a conviction for child abuse or neglect. So those are just automatics, and I would think probably that those would be ones that you would also use. So I'll probably let you read through those, and we can answer questions later about those. The next page, 46 and on, we put in here some sample letters. And I realized as Chris and I were talking that we probably ought to share with you our regular certification letter. And I didn't think of that one, so we'll probably have to get that up on the website. So the denial letter would usually say this, and I think you can use this template. I tried to write it so that it would work for the local church. So it would say, thank you for your interest in becoming local church certified. After careful review and with thoughtful consideration, we regret to inform you that, and I think it should have your local church's name, so Macon United Methodist Certification Authority or whatever, is unable to approve your application. And then it encourages them to communicate with their pastor to see how they're allowed to participate in events and stuff. And I think that's a really good idea anyway, because that gives the pastor a chance to help them understand that we didn't approve you to work with youth ministry, but we still feel like you have gifts and talents, that the church could use. And I just think that's, a really good pastoral kind of conversation. We would like to have a copy sent to the district superintendent, so that's down there under the CC, and the Conference Safe Sanctuary Office. Please let us know if you do have any denials. That's very important that we're also communicated with on that. There's a sample probation letter. It's pretty much the same thing. The second paragraph says, because, we're not able to approve you while you are on probation. You're welcome to reapply for certification after you're no longer on probation. And I put that in there as an example. That's our policy at the conference office. That's just a parameter that our certification authority has agreed to, that they really feel like they don't want to certify somebody while they're on probation. And that's really helped us when an issue file has come up to have that parameter. It just helps when you're going through decisions on files. You're like, okay, that falls under this. Page 48, occasionally you'll have information provided to you. So I just called this the new information letter. And it'll say, in review of new information, and you'll put your church name in there, is suspending Safe Sanctuary certification. And that would be if some event or incident occurs with the individual. Like I think Lee was mentioning, if you had somebody, this is a camp example, but if a counselor went off to town or something and left the kids unsupervised, then that would end up being reported as an incident. So there might, I don't have a good local church example, but it would be like that. And the next page, 49, sometimes this would happen. Let's say it's similar to the new information. There's probably nuances in that of the differences, but following an incident, so like sometimes this has come up on a mission trip, let's say, and so you might say the name of your mission trip that you went on. It's just good documentation that this occurred, and the individual knows that that, and probably by then they're not going to be, they're not surprised. Like Bev mentioned, they may have been sent home from the mission trip, so the certification authority would review this and say, we had this incident and you were sent home and your certification, is being suspended. So that's just a couple example letters. On page 51, I'm kind of working towards having what I think might be like an LCA manual or handbook. So I thought it would just be good to have the duties of an LCA in there. I think probably most of you have already seen those. Page 53, we talked about the utility bill. I did have I did this little presentation, Chris and I did at camping earlier this week. And one of the camp directors wanted to send me their utility bill so I could pay it. And I said, no. No. So we just want to clarify, when you send us your utility bill, we are not going to pay it for you. We want those paid already, please. So thought that was a good point to, he almost caught me on that one, but I was like, no, I don't think we're going to pay that. Okay, so the conference policy is in here, as you can see. Conference procedures. Chris and I have a lot of phone calls sometimes asking us about what kind of ratios are recommended, etc. And so this is kind of good to see what does the conference do, and you can sort of go from there to write your local church. There's resource page. On the scenarios pages, these are some examples. There's about 9. And I think they all have to do with references. I think Sherry's going to talk about this or mention it, but a lot of times our most difficult or gray areas of issues have to do with sorting through references and what kind of comment somebody put on a reference. What does it mean for certification? And do we think, based on what this person said, can we certify them? So we put these in here, and I think they would be excellent for review and give you some good food for thought. And you might be a good training for the certification authority. One of your first meetings, you might want to go through a couple of them, and it's good practice. And it's real common. These kind of scenarios are the types of ones we've actually had in our certification authority. We also, we touched on the FAQs when Krista was talking. She took you to page 67. So on 67 and 68 are some frequently asked questions that we felt like, we're not going to go through the detail right now, but just things that we've been getting questions on that we thought it'd be really helpful to have some answers out there for you on those.
Thanks, Nancy. You have the handout, the one-page handout, if you want to pull that out. I'm going to be referring to that, and I'm going to move through this rather quickly. There's a lot of good information on the handout for you. This will be eventually put on our website, and added to as we're going along. We're trying to work with how best to assist you so that you don't get to a point where you have to sit across from somebody and say, we're not certifying you. And the best way to do that is with good processes leading up to the decision as to who you're going to put through for conference certification. And so what we're trying to help folks get a handle on, what has happened, I think, with a lot of the Safe Sanctuary pieces is that somebody in the local church has decided this person is going to work for children and youth, and then when that decision has been made, they go, and oh, by the way, you've got to be certified for conference or local church certification. And so what that does is it puts all the focus on that process. And if it is a reference that is going to cause the denial and the person has a clean background screen, then automatically what happens? That person knows that it's one of the references which they give, which is some of the issue. We always share background screen information with the local church pastor. That's public information, and it says on the form where they agree to the background screen that this information may be shared with your local church pastor. So that information within the appropriate realms, and there's some good information in the disclosures, the Healthy Disclosures book about what you can share and what you can't, but that is public information and can be shared. It's called shared common interest. Who has a need to have the information in order to provide a safe environment for our children and youth. And so that is shared with the district superintendent and with the local church pastor from the conference level. And we call the person to check up and see what's going on. The greater issue is the references, and we never share confidential reference information other than in the authority. So your LCA will bring it to the authority, and that information is shared there so that we can make an appropriate decision. If Nancy needs to call and get clarification, sometimes what we find is somebody's being overly cautious and they've read something into a question and it really is not an issue at all, so we can clear that up by talking with the reference themselves. But sometimes it is an issue, and that's where it becomes difficult, because that information cannot be shared outside of the local church authority. And sometimes the hard conversation has been, we just can't certify you. And I've been on the other end of the phone with some pretty upset and angry people, and we acknowledge that angst and what they're going through, but yet we cannot share the information with them. So what I'm going to suggest today is to kind of flip that process around, and we're still working a little bit with what this looks like, and make that part of a larger process, the whole certification piece. And so I'm just going to briefly go through this. I don't have time to go into a lot of detail. A lot of it's on your sheet here. And what I'm suggesting is that, that there needs to be a process leading up to putting somebody through for certification. Part of our role as the church, as I said earlier, is to help people figure out what their gifts and skills are and to put them in the right places to serve. And so there are several resources to help you do that. Joy Melton's book, again, on the back table back there, is excellent and has some good resources for you there. The Healthy Disclosures book. I'm going to be lifting up another one here here in just a moment from United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. And so part of it would be setting a process in place that you would have to discern what pieces of that your church want to do. But it is some type of spiritual gifts inventory process. This is an excellent resource here. It's on your sheet. Has enough information in it for 4 to 6 classes on spiritual gifts and what those are. There is a great 85 question spiritual gifts inventory. In fact, this is the one that we got permission from Church of the Resurrection to use on our new nominating process for the conference. That one's online, but there is one in each participant book and a lot of good information on helping somebody discern what really are their gifts for which area to serve. The first piece would be, and this needs to happen, I think, across the board, is more of your people that you can have in that discernment process, whether they're intending on serving right then or not, is a good thing. So some type of spiritual gifts process, an inventory of skills, what are their skills, volunteer application, and the Safe Sanctuaries book has an excellent application form. Do you have your volunteers actually fill out an application with all kinds of information on that and questions that are asked, even to, on one of Joy's form is, how were you parented? And have you ever been exposed to abuse? Have you ever been abused? And that does not mean that they're not going to be able to serve, but it means they bring some things with them into the situation. And so some type of application that is filled out, and so at that point, you're beginning to get an idea of where some of their gifts and skills might be. And so then the process would entail an interview. How many times have we sat down and actually talked to the person in depth that is wanting to work with our children and youth? And so on your sheet here are several questions that might be a part of an interview process. Everything from what are your strengths, what are your growing edges, what would challenge you, and in particular, I mean, those could be general questions, and then if you have decided that this person might be someone that you want to use for children and youth, there are some other specific questions here. How do you handle discipline? How do you see yourself after you've given them guidelines as to the church's discipline policy? How do you see yourself handling that? So there's some really good questions there that can be part of an interview process, which gives you more information. And then what I'm going to suggest, and this is a little different than what a lot of our churches and myself, I worked in Christian education in several churches, have done before. Instead of doing all that process and then going, yes, we decided this person is going to work with our children and youth, and oh, by the way, you need to go get your Safe Sanctuary certification. That what happens is the certification becomes another part of the overall process. And so the expectation of what is set up is that we're going to do these inventories, we're going to do these volunteer forms, we're going to have some questions asked, some interview times, and we're going to have a Safe Sanctuary certification filled out. And then we're going to make a decision as to whether the person should serve in that area or not. Do you see the difference that's there? And what that does is if you have to go back and say, we are denying, it doesn't put the total emphasis on the reference piece that's there. And it is a part of, just because, this is the other thing I wanted to say, we didn't say this earlier, on the front of your packet are kind of 3 foundational tenets that we use, and it is that certification is a privilege and not a right. Nobody has a right to insist that they're working with our children and youth. It is a privilege that we offer to them. Certification does not give entitlement. It's like somebody else was sharing earlier, just because somebody is certified doesn't mean that they can come up and say, okay, I'm certified, I get to work with your children and youth now. And certification is always now tied back to a local church or campsite in the situation of camping, so that what we're doing is giving you all back control. And so that you are in control of the process. So the other thing that kind of needs to be flipped around here is that the local church is the one that is setting the criteria and the guidelines, and they are inviting people to consider working with children and youth in your local church. What that also means is that you all need to do some work, if you haven't already. I know some of you have done some great work, but what are your criteria? You need to have job descriptions for each of the different areas, from Sunday school teacher to nursery worker to who's going to work with your children and youth, setting the expectations for gifts and skills. What do you think is needed? At the conference level, we've decided supervision is one of the things that we're looking at, but what are the criteria you're looking for and the skills you're looking for each position. And also, in addition to that, what Karen McClintock told us in our boundaries training is that too often we don't consider attitude. And that's one of the most important things. So what types of attitudes are you looking for? On the conference level, we have some key expectations of all of our leadership, which includes Christ-centeredness and fruitfulness and excellence. What are the criteria for attitude that you're looking for, and spell those out and go over them. So you're taking back control of the process. And it's you all that are saying, these are some of the positions we have open, and we're going to take a look at where your gifts might best fit, and we're going to determine where it is that we think we can best use you. Does that make sense? And so we'll be working some more on that process, and that way the hope is that by the time that you have made that decision and you've done all those, whatever parts of those processes you're going to use, that you have a pretty good idea from the way that they've answered certain questions, whether they're going to have the characteristics and values that you want working with your children and youth. And so then, you maybe get to a point where you won't even have them do certification because you know that they're not going to fit your criteria for that particular role. So kind of a new way of thinking of it. There's several good pieces here. There's some information in Joy's book, which I encourage you to work with. The other piece that Nancy has talked on is having some expectations set for the authority, is what you are going to do and not going to do, how you're going to make decisions, what criteria you're going to use there. We had a couple questions, and one of the things that I've had some questions on in the past is working with sex offenders in the local church. And I've got 2 or 3 questions that came in at lunch over that. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here because this is another piece that you need to have some policy and procedure around before you have the situation arise. So I really encourage each one of you to go back to your local church and spend some time figuring out what your criteria is going to be. One question was asked is, how do you know if a sex offender is in your church? And one thing is, if you run them through certification and that comes back, we always notify you. There are also, Nancy is the website, there's a Missouri Sex Offender Registry, there's a National Sex Offender Registry, which you can go on, and we encourage you to do as you're working with your workers, and that will tell you who's on the list, and people are always surprised. You can even see who's in the neighborhood around your church. So there are ways to discover that, and so that you know that they are there in your midst. As Nancy said earlier, if somebody's on the sex offender list, we will not certify them. As you all are working with other pieces of that, sometimes they do. The question was, what if they want to attend worship? What we're recommending, and some of this is Karen McClintock's pieces, which are in her book, and some have come from some other places, but I'm mainly going to give you hers because we just went over this at Boundaries training here just a couple of weeks ago. And what she's saying is that once you are aware that you have a registered sex offender in your congregation that's wanting to attend worship, that there's 2 or 3 things that need to happen. One is that if it's a pastor, whoever discovers this, it needs to be shared with whichever leadership group is going to be making the decisions, and hopefully you already have a kind of a plan in place of how you're going to do that. If not, you need to call that group together so that you can sit down and put together a process. So leadership needs to know. Her next question is, who are the others that need to know in order to provide a safe place? And that would be your workers with children and youth, so that they're not recruiting somebody that they're not aware of is on the Missouri sex offender list. So they need to be notified. What Karen McClintock would say is that in child sexual abuse, that the age group that they molested, those parents need to be notified in your congregation. And what I can say to you, some folks go, oh my, but the reality is a lot of those parents are on the sex offender list, and sometimes they're the ones that come and inform the church. And if you don't inform them and they find out, and God forbid that some incident happens, that just causes a whole lot more trouble. So. They're checking. They are checking all the time, and often no. Although I have run into the other situation also, yeah. So and so what happens at that point, as people are notified, the other part of the process needs to be: are you willing to have them on site, and what boundaries are you going to put in place around them? And that could be that they can only attend a certain worship service. Sometimes I've even seen that they have to stay in a particular part of the sanctuary. There has to be somebody, often, that is kind of that's accompanying them, that is with them the entire time that they're in the building, even walking them to and standing inside the restroom, because that's where incidents can happen there. There's a whole number of things that you can do to put some boundaries around them and make sure that that everybody is safe. And that's something that your individual church is going to have to discern what those processes are. We do have some examples that we are on the website, I believe, and that we can send to you around what some of those sample policies are that other churches have used. And yes, we've had a number of churches that have registered sex offenders in their midst. We also are working in conjunction with Karen McClintock and our conference chancellor on some other policies around like feeding programs, meal programs, where you have people coming in from the community that are on the sex offender list to receive food, along with community families that sometimes come in, and workers who often want to bring their children to help serve. And so what are the parameters there that can keep everybody safe? And we're in the process of working on that policy, and we'll have that out as soon as we kind of get some of that settled. Okay, all right. Yeah, we are working on it, and there's been a number of suggestions. We have to go back to our conference chancellor and see how some of those, work, and work on some wording there around some of it. But the bottom line is there needs to be some boundaries that are set. What our social principles say is that and statistics show, is that pedophiles they don't change. That they're always tempted. The statistics have shown that once they have committed, especially a child sexual abuse, that they're apt to do it again. And so boundaries need to be put in place, not just to protect the children and youth, which are our primary concern, but they also need to be in place to protect the person themselves. To keep them, because the temptation is there, to have somebody accountable there with them, to keep them from that temptation, but also to protect them. Because if they're there and an incident happens, that's the first person that they're going to look to. So we want to, our first and priority is our children and youth, but we also want to be attentive and put as many protections in for the person also. So we will be continuing to work with that. Again, there's some good information on process as to what you might look at and how you might make some of those decisions in the Healthy Disclosures book. And again, it would be much better if you had that process. It's always better to form policy not around a particular situation. So go back And hopefully you won't ever have to use it. We're not talking large numbers here. That's the other thing I wanted to say. We have done a lot of work with helping you figure out how to work with references and background screens. The reality is that on the conference level, that usually we only have to deny 8 or 9 people a year. And you heard Nancy, we do thousands of screens. And a lot of those have been because people have sent us folks for conference certification that really didn't need to be conference certified, and put on the form, oh, this is a great person, but they can't supervise. And so we had no choice. So we're anticipating that with a good discernment process, pieces of what I've just laid out for you, and the fact that you won't have to be worrying so much about the supervision part, that was our main criteria, that you really won't have to deny very many people. But what I want to say to you, and I know especially in the local church, this can be very difficult because, as several of us have said, we don't always know the person, most of the time don't know the person. You all do. And you have personal relationships with a lot of these people. And so what I want to say to you right now is that you have been charged with a heavy responsibility and a very important responsibility of making the best decisions for the children and youth and vulnerable adults that are in your care. So sometimes what that's going to mean is you're going to have to make a very hard decision based on what's best for the children and youth, and using the best information that you have, having done the best discernment process that you can do. But sometimes the answer is going to have to be no. And sometimes you're not going to be able to tell them why. And so that takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. And again, we're hoping that with what we've laid out for you, that won't be necessary very often. But there could come that moment. And you just have to stay strong and remember that you're trying to provide the safest place for the children and youth that you have been charged to protect, for the workers that work with them, and for your local church and district and conference. So we're here to assist you in helping process through some of those in any way that we can.